Hello, welcome to part 3 in our 4-part series on the lead up to World War II. In this video, we're going to talk about some of Franklin Roosevelt's plans going into the war, Pentagon plans from the U.S. military, and ways that we plan to stay out of the war, ways that we plan to help the side we chose without getting involved ourselves. So first off, we're going to talk about the court packing plan. This has nothing to do really with World War II. It's just a topic we need to cover. And it starts with the New Deal. Remember, the New Deal was Franklin Roosevelt's plan for increasing the size of the federal government and a lot of government spending to help bring us out of the Great Depression and high unemployment. The Supreme Court at that time was very conservative and was rejecting a lot of his plans, like the Agricultural Adjustment Act, or AAA. So his plan was to offset a lot of the more older conservative Supreme Court justices. His argument was when the Constitution was written, the average life expectancy wasn't nearly as long as it was in the 1930s. And a lot of the Supreme Court justices were dying or retiring before they started to losing their mental strength. So his argument was that any Supreme Court justice over the age of 70 could keep their seat on the Supreme Court, but the president should be allowed to appoint a younger justice to offset them. That would liberalize the Supreme Court, make them a much more liberal organization, one that was sided with the president. That also goes against the whole idea of separation of powers and checks and balances that our Constitution creates. So really fortunately for the United States, not just Republicans, but also conservative Democrats joined together to reject this court packing plan and keep the three different branches of our government separate. So we still have a legislative, executive, and judicial, and we don't have that executive and judicial working together. All right, back to World War II now. As you see here on this slide, we have two main war plans that were used as the basis for the entry into World War II. We mentioned before how the generals and admirals in the Pentagon, when they're not actively fighting a war, they spend their time preparing for potential wars, so that if a war starts, we're not caught without knowing what's going on. We have at least an initial plan to get started with. And the first one we're going to discuss is War Plan Orange, which was originally created in 1920, around the time that Japan was becoming more imperialistic. So the whole basis is a naval war with Japan. Obviously, there's a huge ocean there, the Pacific Ocean, between the west coast of the United States and Japan, this island right here. And if that's going to be the case, instead of allowing Japan to cross that ocean and attack us, we decided to go ahead and move the Pacific Fleet of the U.S. Navy out to the island of Oahu, which is part of the Hawaiian island chains. We established the base there at Pearl Harbor, which you may know we're going to be talking about in our final video, Fighting of the War. So we based the U.S. Navy out of Hawaii, which gets a lot closer to Japan and allows for a buffer zone between there and the United States, preventing potential invasion of the West Coast. The other war plan that we're going to discuss is the Rainbow Plan. You notice the color theme here. Each war plan was color-coded, and each code applied to a certain country. Well, if we're going to fight a war against more than one country, they had a group of rainbow plans. I believe there was 5 of them, Rainbow 1 through Rainbow 5. And I believe it was Rainbow 2 proposed a war in which the United States, along with Great Britain and France, are fighting against Germany and Italy, which is very similar to how World War II is eventually going to shake out. Not Germany, Italy, Germany, and Japan. And the whole idea there is that we would fight a defensive war in the Pacific against using the U.S. Navy to prevent the Japanese from taking U.S. possessions in the Pacific, while fighting a more offensive, more attacking-based war in Europe. So we would send U.S. troops to Great Britain and France and keep a strong foothold on the European continent. The whole idea there is that if Germany was able to defeat democracy in both France and Great Britain, we would then have to cross an entire ocean to get to that fight, which is very difficult to do. Whereas if we keep a foothold here in Western Europe, that gives us a place to land troops and get them acclimated to the situation before they go off and fight immediately. The next thing we're going to talk about is neutrality acts. Let me skip ahead here. As things in Europe got more and more confrontational throughout the 1930s, the U.S. government wanted to make sure that we avoided a lot of the problems that forced us into World War I. And one of the big problems we talked about before was that we were supplying weapons in World War I initially to both Great Britain and Germany. But once Great Britain blockaded the German coast, we only supplied to Great Britain. So now, in 1935, the United States government decided to pass the Neutrality Act of 35, which says that we are not allowed to sell any weapons to countries at war, which are known as belligerents. It doesn't matter if that country invaded another or was the country that was invaded. Either way, they're at war, and we're not allowed to sell weapons to them. You can sell anything else you want. You can sell it on credit. You can loan money to them, just no weapons. And that was in response to Italy's invasion of Ethiopia. Things continued to devolve. Hitler's going to militarize the Rhineland, take over Austria, and that leads us to the Neutrality Act of 1936, which says that there's no loans to countries at war, belligerents. Also, you're not allowed to sail in the ships of countries at war, which, again, we're trying to, with the sailing part, we're trying to prevent another problem like the Lusitania, where 120 Americans were killed by a German submarine while on a British ship. And the loans is trying to prevent what's called debt obligations. If you have a lot of American companies that have provided products to British or French countries or any other country of war, and those countries fail, if we provided those products to them on credit or we loan them money, now we are forced to go to war to help those countries win the war, and that way we can get paid back. Because if those countries we've loaned money to or sold things on credit to lose, well, then our credit is worthless. We're not going to get paid back in that money, and a lot of American companies and American workers are going to hurt because of that. So now we're saying no loans to countries of war. In 1937, we decided to go with cash and carry. So now, in addition to the loans, if you're going to sell any non-weapons products like tomatoes or Band-Aids to a country at war, that country must pay for that in cash up front. Again, no credit, and they must carry it on their own ships because, again, Americans can't sail in other countries' ships, and we don't want to be sailing into their waters. And then 1939, in response to Hitler's occupation of the Sudetenland, we start to allow weapons trade. So now cash and carry applies to all products, including bullets and guns and things like that. You can see at this point we have gone ahead and decided that there's a good side and a bad side here, and that we have to help protect democracy in Europe, and we cannot allow Hitler's totalitarian expansion to take over. At that time, we also introduced the whole idea of Lend-Lease. We're going to start, the U.S. government will start lending items to countries at war, particularly the British and the French, and that is in order to, as he said, if your neighbor's house is on fire, you're not going to sell them a garden hose. You're going to give them your garden hose, and you'll get that back when the fire is put out. So the whole idea is we're identifying that the British and the French, the democracies of Europe, are the side that we're going to support. We use the term arsenal of democracy. We're not going to be fighting ourselves, but we're going to be an arsenal. We're going to provide the weapons for the democracies of Europe to help protect them against totalitarianism and fascism. As the war starts in 1939, when Hitler invades Poland, we get our first ever peacetime draft. As we mentioned before, in World War I, it took us about a year from the time we declared war on Germany in World War I until we actually started sending troops over. So we're going to go ahead and start a draft to start building up the U.S. military so that if we do in fact declare war, we will be ready to fight that war immediately. We won't have to wait. Right. Here you see also we had something called the Destroyers for Bases program. Great Britain had a variety of bases in the Western Hemisphere. We had a lot of old destroyers from World War I, these ships over here. So we're going to give them a lot of our older ships, give a lot of our older ships to the British in exchange for their bases. This helps helps limit the threat of German U-boats to British shipping, and it also helps remove another European power from the Western Hemisphere, which goes along with our Monroe Doctrine and Roosevelt corollary. That is it for this video. We've got one more discussing Japan's path to war, and I will see you there. Have a good day.